I'm Stephanie, 35. Sitting in this courtroom, I never thought I'd be facing my sister, Victoria. Her face is stone, cold as the judge reviews her lawsuit, demanding $4,000 a month for alleged emotional damages I supposedly caused since we were kids. When Judge Thompson finally looks up from the papers, the courtroom falls silent. In my 25 years on the bench, he says, I've never seen such a blatant attempt to turn family strife into a cash grab. This moment is the peak of a nightmare that's been brewing for ages. It makes me sick to my stomach, and I can still feel the white, knuckled grip I had on the table's edge. Before I tell you how this all went down, I'm curious where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments. And if you've ever dealt with a toxic family member, hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. Let me take you back. We grew up in Seattle. On the outside, our family seemed picture perfect. My father, Henry, was a high-flying stockbroker. He brought home a fortune, and we lived in a huge mansion in an upscale neighborhood. My mother, Penelope, was a socialite who spent her days at charity events. To our neighbors and friends, the Harris family was the epitome of wealth and success. But inside our home, things were far from rosy, especially between Victoria and me. With a 5-year age gap, Victoria was the family prodigy from the start. By the time I was learning my ABCs, she was winning national math competitions. At 10, she was already taking college-level courses, while I struggled with basic algebra. Victoria is a genius. My mother would brag to her friends over champagne in our fancy living room, loud enough for me to hear as I sat alone drawing. Some kids are just born special. I remember a parent-teacher conference when I was 11. My teacher raved about my writing skills and how I'd led a school project. On the drive home, I waited for my parents to say something positive, but they spent the whole time talking about Victoria's upcoming International Science Expo. When I finally mentioned what my teacher said, my father just glanced at me in the rear view mirror. That's nice, Stephanie. Maybe one day you'll be as accomplished as your sister. Their favoritism was everywhere. For Victoria's 18th birthday, they bought her a brand new sports car. When my 18th birthday rolled around, I got a cheap watch. Christmas gifts were the same story. Victoria would unwrap designer clothes and jewelry, while I got practical things like books or stationery. Family vacations were always about what Victoria wanted. If she wanted to go to Paris for a fashion show, that's where we went. My suggestion to go to a local beach was dismissed as boring. When I was 16, our relationship went from bad to worse. Victoria had just graduated high school early and was off to Harvard on a full scholarship. I made the mistake of telling her about my crush on a boy named Ethan from my art class. 2 days later, I heard a group of girls in school laughing about pathetic Stephanie, who supposedly wrote Ethan a cheesy love letter. When I confronted Victoria, she just shrugged. Maybe if you weren't so obvious, people wouldn't talk. That same year, she borrowed my favorite painting, a gift from our late grandfather, Arthur. She returned it with a huge tear in it. Sorry, she said without a hint of remorse. It wasn't really your style anyway. When I complained to my parents, my mother sighed. Stephanie, don't be so dramatic. It's just a painting. Victoria has more important things to worry about, like her studies at Harvard. By the time I got to high school, I had major self-esteem issues. While Victoria was in the spotlight, I faded into the background, convinced I'd never measure up. I stopped sharing my dreams with my family because I knew they'd compare me to Victoria and find me lacking. The only one who ever saw me for who I was our grandfather, Arthur. He was a retired painter with a kind heart. He lived in a small cottage on the outskirts of Seattle. While my parents were at every one of Victoria's events, I often spent weekends with Grandpa Arthur. He'd say, Stephanie, you have a unique way of seeing the world. That's a gift, even if others don't recognize it. When I brought home an A+ on a painting project, my parents barely looked at it. But Grandpa Arthur asked me to explain every brushstroke and then hung it in his living room. Never try to be like anyone else, especially not your sister, he'd tell me. When I was 19, Grandpa Arthur had a heart attack. It wasn't fatal, but it scared us all. Victoria came to the hospital for a few minutes, then left in a hurry, saying she had a study group. I stayed by his side until visiting hours ended, holding his hand and reading his favorite poems. As he recovered, I could see a change in his eyes when he looked at our family. He started to notice how my parents treated us differently. One Christmas, after my parents spent the whole dinner praising Victoria's latest academic award, he pulled me aside. True worth isn't measured by achievements, Stephanie. Some people learn that too late. I didn't understand the weight of his words then, but I do now. Fast forward 10 years. I was working as a freelance graphic designer. The pay wasn't great, but I loved the creative work. I lived in a small apartment in the city. Victoria, on the other hand, had become exactly what our parents wanted her to be. After graduating from Harvard and then Yale Law, she landed a job at a top-tier law firm. She married Alexander, a wealthy real estate developer, and they bought a mansion in the most exclusive part of Seattle. Their wedding was in all the society magazines, with my parents beaming proudly in every photo. "Your sister really knows how to build a life," my mother commented during one of our rare phone calls. "Their home has 7 bedrooms. They're planning for a big family. Smart girl." The favoritism continued into adulthood. When Victoria and Alexander were looking for a new investment property, my parents gave them $100,000 as a helping hand. 6 months later, when I asked for a $10,000 loan to upgrade my design equipment, my father's response was swift. "We're not in the business of funding hobbies, Stephanie. Maybe focus on getting a more stable job." During this time, Grandpa Arthur's health was declining. At 88, he had a second, more serious heart attack that left him bedridden. He refused to go to a nursing home, so I took on the responsibility of taking care of him. Despite my busy work schedule, I'd visit him every day after work, cook his meals, and help him with his medications. On weekends, I'd do his shopping, cleaning, and laundry. It was tough on my budget, but I never thought of it as a burden. Grandpa Arthur and I would sit in his sunroom, and he'd tell me stories about his youth and ask me about my design projects. He kept a portfolio of all my work, from my childhood drawings to my professional designs, and would show it off to his friends. "My Stephanie has a special gift," he'd say. Victoria's visits to Grandpa were few and far between. She'd show up in her luxury car, drop off an expensive gift like a designer scarf, spend 20 minutes talking about her latest big case, then rush off, saying she had a dinner meeting. My parents still praised her for being so generous with Grandpa. "Victoria brought him that beautiful scarf from Chanel," my mother said. "So thoughtful, even though she's so busy." I bit my tongue, not pointing out that I was the one taking care of him every day. As Grandpa's health got worse, he confided in me about his disappointment in Victoria and my parents' blindness. "They only see what they want to see, Stephanie. Always have. But I see you, and the little things you do mean the world." It was during this period that I met Ryan through a mutual friend at an art exhibition. Ryan was a software engineer with a kind smile. He quickly became my rock in this chaotic life. Unlike my previous boyfriends, who got frustrated with my family obligations, Ryan would come with me to visit Grandpa. He'd listen to Grandpa's stories and help with the odd jobs around the house. After a particularly uncomfortable family dinner, where my parents fawned over Victoria's latest promotion, Ryan searched for a word. "Toxic," I suggested. I was going to say challenging, but yeah, toxic works, he said, squeezing my hand under the table. "You don't have to put up with this, you know." Before Ryan, I never thought I could set boundaries with my family. Their treatment seemed normal, or at least inevitable. But through his eyes, I started to see how messed up our family dynamic was. The turning point came at Grandpa Arthur's 90th birthday party. I'd spent weeks planning a small gathering at his cottage. I invited his old friends, prepared his favorite foods, and made a photo album of his life. Victoria showed up an hour late, interrupting a story one of Grandpa's friends was telling, to present an expensive gold-framed painting. "It's from Van Cleef Arpels," she announced loudly, as if the brand made it more meaningful. When it was time for Grandpa to speak, he reached for my hand. "I want to thank you all for coming," he said, his voice weak but clear. "But most of all, I want to thank my Stephanie. While others bring me lovely gifts now and then, He glanced at Victoria. Stephanie gives me the most precious gift of all, her time and her love, day after day. That's what family is all about. The room fell silent. Victoria's face turned bright red, and her fingers tightened around her champagne glass. My parents shifted uncomfortably, exchanging looks of confusion and annoyance. Ryan, sitting next to me, squeezed my hand supportively. Later, as the guests were leaving, I overheard Victoria talking to my mother in the kitchen. "He's clearly losing it," Victoria said dismissively, as if Stephanie's occasional visits compare to the financial support I provide. "Did you see that cheap photo album? I could have had a professional one made." My mother replied, "Your grandfather has always had a soft spot for the underdog. Don't take it personally, dear." I walked away, feeling a strange mix of vindication and sadness. For the first time, I'd been publicly recognized in my family, but it also showed just how deep the rift between us was. 3 months after the party, Grandpa Arthur passed away peacefully in his sleep. I was with him the night before, helping him get ready for bed. He seemed tired but in good spirits, reminiscing about a summer he spent in Italy. His last words to me were, "You're the heart of this family, Stephanie. Never forget that." The next morning, his caregiver found him. I got the call at work and rushed to his cottage, tears blurring my vision. By the time I arrived, my parents were already there, and Victoria pulled up in her Mercedes, still in her work suit. I had to reschedule a major client meeting, she announced, as if it was a huge sacrifice. The next few days were a blur of funeral arrangements. Victoria took over, saying, "I know the best funeral home in Seattle. Grandpa deserves the best, and I'm happy to pay." The implication that I couldn't afford to give Grandpa a proper send-off hung in the air. I focused on the personal touches, like choosing his favorite hymns and making a memorial video with photos of his life. Victoria gave a polished speech at the funeral, but it felt like she was missing the real essence of who Grandpa was. A week after the funeral, we went to Grandpa's lawyer's office for the reading of the will. Mr. Johnson, an old family friend and Grandpa's legal advisor for decades, greeted us somberly. "Before we start," he said, "Arthur wanted me to tell you that his decisions were made with a clear mind and a lot of thought." This unusual preface made my parents raise their eyebrows, and Victoria shifted impatiently in her seat. "Let's get on with it," my father said. "We all know Arthur was of sound mind." Mr. Johnson began reading the will. I was lost in memories of Grandpa's cottage, his laughter, and the smell of his paint studio. I was jolted back to reality when I heard my name. "To my granddaughter, Stephanie Harris, I leave my cottage at 2345 Pine Street, Seattle, and all its contents, except for items specifically mentioned below. I also leave Stephanie $300,000 for my savings, with the hope that she will pursue her artistic dreams and build the life she deserves." The room went dead silent. I felt like the air had been sucked out. Victoria's face went completely still, except for her eyes, which burned with rage. "To my granddaughter, Victoria Harris Thompson, I leave my collection of rare coins, which have been appraised at approximately $50,000. These coins represent our family's history and should be treasured." Mr. Johnson paused and looked up. "This is ridiculous," Victoria snapped, breaking the silence. "There must be a mistake." Mr. Johnson replied calmly, "There's no mistake. Arthur amended his will 8 months ago after his second heart attack. I verified his mental capacity, as did his doctor." My father repeated, 8 months ago, his eyes shifting to me suspiciously. Around the time Stephanie was spending so much time with him, Victoria stood up abruptly. "He was manipulated. This will is a fraud." Mr. Johnson reached for another envelope. Arthur anticipated this reaction and left a letter explaining his decisions. "Would you like me to read it?" "Yes," I whispered, while Victoria said, "That won't be necessary." Mr. Johnson opened the letter anyway. "My dear family," he read, "if you're hearing this letter, my decisions may have hurt some feelings. That was never my intention. I've left my cottage and most of my money to Stephanie, not because I love Victoria less, but because I've seen the patterns in our family over the years. Victoria has had every advantage, a successful career, a wealthy husband, and parents who've always put her first. Stephanie, on the other hand, has shown me the true meaning of family through her constant care and love, often at great personal cost. This inheritance is a thank you for her years of selfless devotion and an attempt to balance the scales that have been tipped for too long. The coins I've left to Victoria are a symbol of our family's legacy. I hope she'll cherish them and remember that true value isn't always about money. With all my love, Arthur Harris. Victoria's face turned red, then settled into a cold, hard expression. So, that's it. She spent his last days turning him against me, and you all just went along with it. That's not what happened, I protested. You've been jealous of me your whole life, and now you've found a way to get back at me. Congratulations, Victoria sneered. My parents sat in stunned silence. Victoria, please, I said, tears in my eyes. This is about what Grandpa wanted. After you poisoned his mind against his successful granddaughter? Victoria retorted. She turned to my parents. Are you going to say anything? Your younger daughter just stole $500,000 from our family. My father cleared his throat. Stephanie, your grandfather was old and vulnerable. Did you suggest these changes to him? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. No, I had no idea. Grandpa never talked to me about his will. My mother said quietly, it's awfully coincidental. All those private hours with him, and suddenly the will changes in your favor. I looked at their faces and realized, with a sinking heart, that they actually believed I'd manipulated Grandpa for money. The thought was so absurd, so against everything I stood for, that I was speechless. Mr. Johnson interjected. Arthur specifically told me not to use Stephanie as a witness for the will changes to avoid these accusations. The witnesses were myself and Dr. Miller, who has no connection to either granddaughter. But this information did nothing to soften the hostility from my family. As we left the lawyer's office, Ryan was waiting for me in the parking lot. One look at my face told him everything. That bad? He asked, pulling me into a hug. Worse, I whispered. They think I manipulated Grandpa for his money. Over the next few weeks, things got worse. Victoria launched a smear campaign against me among our extended family and friends. Suddenly, cousins who used to be friendly became distant. My aunt called to ask if the rumors were true that I'd kept Victoria from visiting Grandpa in his last months. It was an absurd accusation, considering Victoria's voluntary absence. At family gatherings, which became more and more tense, Victoria would make cutting remarks about fortune, hunters, and elder abusers. My parents, while not openly hostile, didn't defend me, making their position clear. Ryan suggested I try to reach a compromise to end this nightmare. You could offer to split some of the assets with Victoria, he said one evening as I stared at another angry text from her. I knew I'd done nothing wrong, but I decided to give it a try. I called Victoria and suggested meeting at a high-end coffee shop downtown. To my surprise, she agreed. At the coffee shop, after we sat down, I said, I want to propose a compromise. I know Grandpa's decision hurt you, and that wasn't my or his intention. What if I sold the cottage and split the proceeds with you? We could each keep the specific items he left us, but share the major assets. Victoria studied me for a long time, her expression unreadable. That's your idea of a compromise? Giving me less than a third of what should be mine. This isn't about feelings, Stephanie. This is about justice. You manipulated an old man and stole my inheritance. I felt my temper rising. That's not true. I spent time with Grandpa because I loved him, not because I wanted anything from him. Victoria said coldly, save the act. I've already talked to our family lawyer. This will can be contested on the grounds of undue influence, and with Mom and Dad's testimony about your suspicious behavior, I have a strong case. I felt the blood drain from my face. There was no suspicious behavior. I took care of Grandpa when no one else would. Victoria's smile was razor sharp. We'll see what a judge says. 2 days later, Mr. Johnson called to tell me that Victoria had indeed filed a legal challenge to the will. When I asked how worried I should be, his sigh said it all. Arthur did everything by the book, and his wishes were clear. But will contests are unpredictable and always ugly. Be prepared for your family relationships to take a hit, no matter the outcome. What I didn't know then was that Alexander, Victoria's husband, had come up with an even more destructive plan than just contesting the will. My last attempt at family reconciliation was a month after Grandpa's death. My parents invited Victoria and me to dinner at our old family mansion. I went, hoping they'd come to their senses and try to make peace. But it was an ambush. Victoria was already there, sitting at the dining table with my parents on either side of her. The conversation started civilly, with my mother serving a fancy dinner and my father talking about a business deal he was working on. Just as I started to relax a bit, Victoria put down her fork and looked at me. I've been thinking about our childhood and how you've damaged me over the years. Damage. I repeated, confused. Psychological and emotional damage, she clarified. Living in the shadow of your resentment has taken a toll on my mental health. My therapist has helped me see how your constant undermining affected my self-esteem and relationships. I looked at my parents, expecting them to see how crazy this sounded, but they nodded sympathetically. Victoria has been seeing Dr. Parker for anxiety related to family issues. He's one of the top psychologists in Seattle, my mother explained. What family issues? I asked, completely bewildered. You were the golden child. You got everything you ever wanted. That's your narrative, Victoria countered smoothly. My reality was living with a sister who resented me and tried to ruin my relationships, and finally turned our grandfather against me in his last days. The conversation went downhill from there. Victoria listed a bunch of grievances that were completely twisted from reality. According to her, I deliberately sabotaged her law school projects, poisoned her relationships with her colleagues, and isolated Grandpa to manipulate him. When I finally stood up, unable to take it anymore, Victoria delivered the final blow. My lawyer will be contacting you. I'm suing you for emotional damages for $1,000 a month for the trauma you've caused. I stared at her in disbelief. You can't be serious. Dead serious, she replied. And with Mom and Dad's testimony, my chances are good. I looked at my parents. You're supporting this? My father cleared his throat. We love both our daughters, but we can't ignore the evidence of Victoria's suffering. Her therapist has documented it. I left their house in tears, calling Ryan from my car because I was shaking too much to drive. As he held me in the passenger seat, I realized that the family I once knew was gone. The formal lawsuit notice arrived on a Monday morning. The thick envelope was filled with legal jargon, but the message was clear. Victoria Harris Thompson was suing me, Stephanie Harris, for intentional emotional distress, demanding $4,000 a month for life. She also wanted the court to overturn Grandpa's will and give her the cottage and half of the money. The allegations were so outlandish that I would have laughed if I wasn't so scared. According to the lawsuit, I'd waged a lifelong psychological war against Victoria, causing her severe anxiety, depression, and relationship problems. The document cited incidents from our childhood that were either made up or distorted beyond recognition. After reading the first few pages, I felt a panic attack coming on. I slid down the wall of my apartment, the papers scattered around me, trying to remember the breathing exercises my therapist had taught me years ago. Therapy I'd started because of the anxiety of growing up in the shadow of Victoria. Ryan found me an hour later. He took one look at the legal papers and immediately called his friend, Lisa, an attorney who specialized in family law. This is the most ridiculous lawsuit I've ever seen, Lisa declared after reviewing the papers in her office. But ridiculous doesn't mean harmless. Family lawsuits are always emotional and unpredictable. Judges can be swayed by all sorts of things. We need to take this seriously. The next few weeks were a crash course in the legal system. As we entered the discovery phase, Victoria's legal team, led by Alexander, asked for everything: my childhood diaries, my emails with Grandpa, and my financial records related to his care. They also submitted evidence of my alleged psychological abuse. There were selectively edited excerpts from Victoria's childhood diary. One entry read, "Stephanie was watching me study again today. She's always lurking, probably jealous because she can't keep up." It failed to mention that I was 12 at the time and was sitting in the same room doing my own homework. There were also manipulated photos from family events, with shadows added to make me look menacing, and written statements from my parents about times when I'd supposedly undermined Victoria, like deliberately scheduling an art exhibition on the same day as her big law firm presentation. The reality was that the exhibition date was set by the gallery, not me. The most disturbing were the medical records Victoria submitted, showing therapy sessions for anxiety and depression that she claimed were caused by me. Her therapist, Dr. Parker, had provided a statement linking her mental health problems to my alleged behavior. How can a professional therapist make these claims without talking to me? I asked Lisa during one of our preparation meetings. Therapists can only go by what their clients tell them. If Victoria has been telling Dr. Parker these stories for years, he may believe them. We'll have to challenge his conclusions in court. The stress of defending myself started to affect every part of my life. I was distracted at work, missing deadlines, and my designs lacked my usual creativity. My manager, while sympathetic, warned that my job was at risk if my performance didn't improve. I couldn't sleep, and when I did, I had nightmares about being locked up for crimes I didn't commit. The inheritance from Grandpa, money that should have been a blessing, sat untouched in a separate account, a constant reminder of how quickly things could turn bad. Throughout this ordeal, Ryan was my rock. He took on extra freelance projects to help pay for our legal fees, accompanied me to every meeting with Lisa, and comforted me during my night terrors. "You're the strongest person I know," he told me one evening as we sat on my balcony, watching the sunset over Seattle. "Most people would have broken under this pressure." "I don't feel strong," I admitted. "I feel like I'm barely holding on." He took my hand. "Maybe this isn't the best time, but..." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. But I realize there's no perfect moment. It's just us against the world." Inside the box was a simple but beautiful ring with a sapphire surrounded by diamonds. It was my grandmother's. She was an artist, too. She would have loved you. Through tears, I said yes. We decided to keep our engagement a secret for now, not wanting to give Victoria more ammunition. Our brief moment of happiness was short-lived. The next morning, I found 1-star reviews of my design work on several professional platforms. The language was similar to the allegations in Victoria's lawsuit. The timing and wording made it obvious who was behind it. When I told Lisa, she advised me to document everything but not to respond. This kind of harassment actually helps our case. It shows the court who's really causing emotional distress. Things got even worse when Victoria started contacting my clients directly. 2 of them called me, confused and concerned, saying they'd received emails warning them about my unethical business practices and ongoing legal issues. One client, a small startup I was designing a logo for, put our project on hold until my personal matters were resolved. The final straw was when Victoria showed up at my workplace unannounced, asking to speak to my manager about concerns regarding an employee. Fortunately, my manager recognized her from the photos I'd shown him and refused to meet with her. But the incident left me shaken and embarrassed. "She's trying to destroy your life," Ryan said that evening, his usually calm demeanor replaced by anger. "This is about more than just the inheritance. She wants to ruin you." As we prepared for the trial, an unexpected thing happened. While going through Grandpa's old papers, I found a hidden journal. It was filled with his thoughts about our family over the last few years, especially his concerns about Victoria. One entry stood out. "Victoria visited today after months of not coming. She spent the whole time talking about her new house and then started asking pointed questions about my will. When I changed the subject, she got angry and left. I'm worried she only cares about my money." Taped to the last page of the journal was a memory card with a note, record of Victoria's true nature. When Ryan and I watched the videos on my laptop, we were shocked. There was a video of Victoria rummaging through Grandpa's desk drawers while he was in the other room, and another of her on the phone, saying, "I'm stuck at this old man's house again. Mom's on my case about family duty. This place is a dump, but at least there's a fortune waiting for me when he's gone." I showed the journal and videos to Lisa. She was cautiously optimistic. This is strong evidence of Victoria's true motives. But using it means exposing Grandpa's private thoughts and actions. It could be effective, but are you okay with that? I struggled with the ethical implications. Grandpa was a private man who valued his dignity. Would he want his secret recordings and personal thoughts shown in court, even to defend me? What if we keep it as a last resort? I suggested. Use it only if we really need to. Lisa nodded. A good strategy. Let's see how Victoria's case goes first. The pre-trial hearing was on a rainy Friday. The courtroom was small and stuffy, with old wooden benches and bright fluorescent lights. Judge Thompson, a serious-looking man in his 60s with gray hair and a sharp gaze, reviewed the case files with an unreadable expression. Alexander presented Victoria's case with confidence, spinning a story of my alleged psychological abuse that sounded almost believable. Victoria took the stand briefly, giving a tearful testimony about how I'd made her life miserable for years. When Lisa presented our defense, focusing on the lack of real evidence and the suspicious timing of Victoria's claims, I saw a flicker of doubt in Judge Thompson's eyes. But he decided to let the case go to a full trial. The court takes allegations of familial emotional distress seriously. While there are concerns about some aspects of this case, Mrs. Harris, Thompson has provided enough cause for a full examination of the facts. As we left the courthouse, I noticed a reporter from a local news website taking notes. By that evening, there was an article online with the headline, "Sister Sues Sister: The High-Stakes Family Drama." The article was somewhat balanced, but included quotes from Victoria about seeking justice for years of hidden abuse. Great, I muttered to Ryan as we read it on my laptop. Now I'm a public villain, too. What had started as a private family dispute was becoming a public spectacle. But as the initial shock and hurt faded, I felt a new determination. Years of being the family doormat had taught me to back down, but with Grandpa's inheritance, Ryan's support, and Victoria's obvious malice, something inside me snapped. I was done being a victim. If Victoria wants a war, she'll find out I'm not as weak as she thinks, I told Ryan that night. The morning of the trial was cold for Seattle. A light drizzle was falling as I stood on the courthouse steps with Ryan and Lisa, watching the news vans set up. Our family drama had caught the attention of the media, framed as a cautionary tale about inheritance disputes. Remember, stay calm, Lisa reminded me. Judge Thompson values emotional control. Victoria arrived a few minutes later, stepping out of her Mercedes in a designer suit that made her look like a victim. She had a pale face and a trembling lip, with just the right amount of makeup to emphasize her suffering. Alexander guided her up the steps, his arm protectively around her. In contrast, I wore a simple black suit, my hair pulled back in a ponytail, and minimal makeup. Ryan squeezed my hand as we followed Lisa into the courtroom. Judge Thompson entered at 9 a.m. sharp. His demeanor was as stern as I remembered from the pre-trial hearing. After the preliminary instructions, Alexander called Victoria as their first witness. On the stand, Victoria painted a picture of our childhood that I barely recognized. According to her, I'd been a master manipulator from a young age, deliberately trying to ruin her achievements and self-esteem. She claimed I'd whisper mean things to her when no one else could hear, like, "They only love you because you're rich," or "Without your fancy degrees, you're nothing." I stared at her in disbelief. These conversations had never happened. In fact, it was Victoria who had always made me feel inferior. "Can you give specific examples of this abuse?" Alexander prompted, his voice gentle. Victoria described a series of incidents throughout our childhood, each one twisted from reality. She said I'd spilled coffee on her law school graduation speech the night before. In reality, it was an accident and I'd apologized. She also claimed I'd planned a business meeting on the same day as her wedding anniversary. It was a complete lie. The meeting was scheduled by my client. "The worst betrayal," Victoria continued, her voice breaking, "was when you turned Grandpa against me in his last days. Grandpa and I were so close, but then he suddenly changed towards me." I gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles turned white. That conversation had never happened. Lisa put a hand on my arm, warning me to stay calm. Alexander then asked, "How has this affected you emotionally?" "I've been in therapy for years," Victoria replied. "Dr. Parker diagnosed me with severe anxiety and depression because of your abuse. I have trust issues in my marriage and panic attacks before family gatherings." She looked at me directly. "The inheritance was the final straw, proof that you'd succeeded in turning the person I loved most against me." When Alexander finished questioning, Lisa approached for cross-examination. "Mrs. Harris, Thompson, you've described a pattern of abuse over decades, but there are no witnesses to these events. There's no contemporaneous documentation. And your parents have never actually seen you being abused by your sister, correct?" "The abuse was subtle," Victoria insisted. "Stephanie was careful to do it when no one else was around." "So, there's no one who can confirm these incidents?" Lisa asked. "My parents saw the effects," Victoria replied. "The effects, but not the cause," Lisa clarified. "Let's talk about your visits to your grandfather before his death. How often did you see him in the last year?" Victoria shifted uncomfortably. "I was very busy with my career. I visited when I could." Lisa referred to the home health aides records. "According to these, you visited 3 times in the last 12 months. Is that correct?" "I called often," Victoria countered. Lisa showed the phone records. "The records show only 2 calls in that period. Meanwhile, your sister visited several times a week and called daily. And she was working full-time while taking care of your grandfather. Would you say she had the luxury of time?" As the cross-examination continued, Lisa systematically pointed out the inconsistencies in Victoria's testimony, from the timeline of the alleged incidents to the lack of real evidence. By the time Victoria stepped down, her calm victim act was starting to crack, and flashes of anger were showing. My parents testified next. Their accounts supported Victoria's story, but under Lisa's cross-examination, they had to admit they'd never actually seen me do the things Victoria described. "So, your belief that Stephanie psychologically abused Victoria is based solely on what Victoria told you?" Lisa asked my father. "We could see the effects," he insisted. "Victoria would be upset after seeing Stephanie. Did you ever consider other reasons for her distress, like the natural consequences of her own actions?" Lisa suggested. My father's expression hardened. "Victoria has always been our successful, responsible daughter. Stephanie has always been different." The way he said different cut deep, but it also showed the real family dynamic that had shaped us. After lunch, it was my turn to testify. Lisa had prepared me well, emphasizing the importance of sticking to the facts. I described our childhood from my perspective, Victoria as the golden child, me as the overlooked one, the constant favoritism from my parents, and my genuine relationship with Grandpa based on love and shared interests, not on getting an inheritance. "Did you ever engage in the behaviors your sister described?" Lisa asked. "Never," I stated firmly. "Our relationship was difficult, but I never deliberately tried to hurt Victoria. If anything, I spent my childhood trying to get my parents' approval, which they always gave to Victoria." When Alexander cross-examined me, his approach was aggressive. "Isn't it true that you were jealous of your sister's success?" he demanded. "I was jealous of the unequal treatment we received," I clarified. "Not her achievements themselves. And I never turned Grandpa against Victoria. He formed his own opinions based on her actions." "Convenient that those opinions led to you getting the bulk of the inheritance," Alexander said with a smirk. "I was as surprised as anyone by Grandpa's will." "I never discussed inheritance with him," I replied. Despite Alexander's attempts to provoke me, I kept my composure. When I stepped down, Ryan gave me a thumbs up from the gallery. The trial took a turn when Lisa called Dr. Owens, a family therapist Victoria had seen briefly 7 years ago. Alexander immediately objected. "Any communication between my client and Dr. Owens is protected by therapist-patient confidentiality." Lisa countered. "Mrs. Harris, Thompson waived that confidentiality when she put her mental health at issue in this lawsuit and submitted Dr. Parker's records. Also, she signed a general release of her mental health records during the discovery process, which includes Dr. Owens' records." Judge Thompson reviewed the release forms and overruled the objection. Victoria's face went pale. It was the first time I'd seen real fear in her expression. Dr. Owens, a soft-spoken man in his 50s, explained that Victoria had come to him for 6 sessions but stopped when he suggested that her problems might be related to her own insecurities. "Can you tell the court what Mrs. Thompson said about her sister during those sessions?" Lisa asked. "She was very resentful of her sister," Dr. Owens testified. "Not because of any abuse, but because she felt that her sister had a closer relationship with their grandfather. She said, 'Grandpa sees something special in Stephanie that he doesn't see in me, and it drives me crazy. I'm the successful one. I should be his favorite.'" A murmur went through the courtroom. Victoria's hands clenched into fists. Lisa continued, "Did she ever mention anything about the inheritance?" "She was worried that her grandfather might leave a large part of his estate to Stephanie. When I asked why, given her own financial success, she said, 'It's not about the money. It's about winning. Stephanie has taken enough from me already. She doesn't get to take Grandpa's money, too.'" "And did she ever mention psychological abuse from her sister?" "No," Dr. Owens stated firmly. "The dynamic she described was one of jealousy on her part, not abuse from her sister." Victoria jumped up. "He's lying. This is all a lie." Judge Thompson warned, "Mrs. Thompson, control yourself. Another outburst like that, and I'll hold you in contempt." Alexander managed to calm her down, but the damage was done. Her victim mask had shattered. The final nail in the coffin was when Emily, Victoria's former assistant, testified. She said that Victoria had talked about suing me long before Grandpa's death, regardless of the inheritance. She said, "I'm going to teach Stephanie a lesson she'll never forget," Emily recalled. She also asked me to find cases with the highest emotional damage awards and to hide some of her financial assets from the court. Emily revealed that Victoria and Alexander had investment accounts worth over $3 million that they'd tried to keep hidden. By the end of all the testimony, the atmosphere in the courtroom had changed completely. What started as a case about my alleged abuse of Victoria had become an expose of her manipulation and vindictiveness. In his closing argument, Alexander tried to focus on Victoria's emotional suffering, but his efforts were in vain against the weight of the contradictory evidence. Lisa's closing statement emphasized the lack of evidence for Victoria's claims and the strong evidence of her true motives. "This case is not about emotional damage caused by Stephanie Harris. It's about Victoria Thompson's inability to accept that her grandfather saw through her and made a fair decision about his estate. It's about a lifetime of privilege colliding with the reality that love and care can't be bought or manipulated." Judge Thompson announced that he'd take a day to consider his decision. As we left the courtroom, I saw the fear in Victoria's eyes. For the first time, she seemed to realize the consequences of her actions. The next day, the courtroom was packed. News of the dramatic testimony had spread, and people were curious to hear the verdict. I sat next to Lisa, trying to calm my racing heart. Ryan sat behind me, his presence a source of strength. Victoria and Alexander arrived just before the proceedings started. Victoria had changed into a power suit, as if trying to regain her confidence. My parents slipped in and sat in the middle of the gallery. Judge Thompson entered and settled behind the bench. The courtroom fell silent. After careful consideration of all the evidence and testimony in this case, he began, "I am ready to deliver my judgment in the matter of Thompson versus Harris. Mrs. Thompson has brought serious allegations against her sister, claiming decades of psychological abuse and resulting emotional damage. The court takes such claims seriously, as family relationships can be a source of great pain when they turn toxic." My heart sank at these words, thinking he was siding with Victoria. But then he continued, "However, serious allegations require serious evidence. In this case, the evidence not only fails to support Mrs. Thompson's claims but actively contradicts them. There is a lack of contemporaneous evidence for her allegations, contradictory testimony from Dr. Owens, and revelations about her true motives. The contrast between Stephanie Harris's consistent care for her grandfather and Victoria Thompson's minimal involvement is stark. What emerges from this evidence is not a picture of abuse by the defendant, but a pattern of manipulation and entitlement by the plaintiff. In my 25 years on the bench, I have rarely seen a case where the evidence so thoroughly undermines a plaintiff's claims. Mrs. Harris, Thompson, this court finds your lawsuit to be frivolous, vindictive, and potentially fraudulent. Your attempt to turn normal sibling rivalry, in which you clearly had the upper hand, into a financial gain is an abuse of the legal system and a misunderstanding of what constitutes compensable emotional distress. Victoria's face went white as a sheet. Judge Thompson continued, "Furthermore, it appears that you pursued this lawsuit not because of any real harm suffered, but as revenge for your grandfather's legitimate decision to distribute his assets as he saw fit. This court will not be used as a tool for such revenge." He then turned to my parents. "I am also concerned about the role Mr. and Mrs. Harris played in enabling this situation. Your testimony revealed a family dynamic that consistently favored one child over the other, which likely contributed to the resentments and conflicts that led to this lawsuit." My parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Therefore, Judge Thompson concluded, "This case is dismissed with prejudice, meaning Mrs. Harris, Thompson cannot refile these claims in the future. Additionally, due to the frivolous nature of this lawsuit, the plaintiff is ordered to pay the defendant's reasonable legal fees in full." He paused, his expression serious. "This judgment is not just about winning or losing a family dispute. It's about the integrity of our legal system and the principle that courts are for justice, not personal vendettas." With a final tap of his gavel, Judge Thompson ended the proceedings. For a moment, the courtroom was silent as everyone processed the verdict. Then Victoria stood up, her face endued with rage. "This is outrageous. I'll appeal." Alexander tried to calm her down, but she pushed him away. "You're supposed to win this case. What kind of lawyer are you?" As Victoria's public meltdown continued, Lisa calmly gathered our papers. "Let's leave quietly," she advised. "The judgment speaks for itself." Outside the courthouse, reporters approached us for comments. Lisa gave a brief, professional statement about my relief and my hope to move on. I added that I hoped our family could start to heal. Meanwhile, cameras captured Victoria's continued outburst as she stormed to her car, Alexander following behind with a look of disappointment. The local news covered the story with headlines like, "Judge dismisses vindictive sibling lawsuit, emotional damage claim backfires." In the days that followed, the effects of the judgment rippled through our lives. Alexander filed for divorce from Victoria, citing irreconcilable differences. Privately, he told mutual friends that the trial had shown him a side of his wife he couldn't accept. My parents reached out to me, first with an awkward email expressing regret, and then with a request to meet for coffee. When we met at a coffee shop, their discomfort was obvious. "We never meant to hurt you, Stephanie," my mother began. "We always loved both our daughters. But you didn't treat us equally," I replied softly. "And you were willing to testify against me based on Victoria's lies without even asking my side of the story." My father looked confused. "We believed Victoria because she's always been so successful." "You believed her because you've always believed her," I corrected. "From the start, you decided she was the daughter worth investing in, and I was an afterthought." They didn't deny it, which was the most honest thing they'd done in a long time. "We want to try to fix our relationship," my mother said after a long silence. I took a deep breath. "I'm open to it, but it has to be a new relationship based on who I really am, not who you've thought I was for 35 years. And you need to acknowledge the favoritism that caused all this." My parents exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable, but not rejecting the idea. We agreed to start family therapy. Victoria's professional reputation took a huge hit. The local legal community is small, and news of the judgment spread quickly. Several clients asked to have their cases transferred to other lawyers at her firm, and she was excluded from high-profile cases. Her social standing also suffered as friends who had initially supported her distanced themselves when they learned the full story. In contrast, my design business started to thrive. The positive media attention from the trial brought in new clients. A well-known local entrepreneur told me, Anyone who can handle that kind of pressure with such grace has the character I want to work with. Ryan and I decided to move forward with our wedding plans. We used part of Grandpa's inheritance as a down payment on a beautiful house with a studio for my design work. Throughout this time, Victoria made some attempts to repair her image. She started a social media campaign, portraying herself as the victim of a miscarriage of justice, but the responses were mostly negative. An ill-advised TV interview backfired when the host asked about Dr. Owens's testimony, and Victoria walked out. Former friends and colleagues started sharing stories of her manipulative behavior, confirming the judge's assessment. I received messages of support from people who had gone through similar family situations. Their words of encouragement helped me heal wounds I didn't even know I had. Reading about your case was like reading about my own family, one message said. Thank you for standing up for yourself. It gives me the courage to do the same. As the dust settled, my parents made real efforts to understand their role in creating the toxic family dynamic. After several family therapy sessions, my father had a breakthrough. I think we favored Victoria because she was like us, ambitious, focused on success, and seeking external validation. You were different, Stephanie, and we didn't know how to appreciate those differences. It wasn't a complete change, but it was a start, an admission that the problem wasn't me but their narrow view of success. 6 months after the trial, as Ryan and I were finalizing our wedding details, we heard that Victoria had sold her luxury house and moved into a small apartment. Her life had taken a huge turn, and while I felt sad for what our relationship could have been, I also felt relieved that her power to hurt me was gone. I don't know if Victoria and I will ever reconcile. Reconciliation requires both sides to face the truth and work towards healing. So far, she hasn't shown that she's capable of that. But life has a way of surprising us. One rainy day, there was a knock on my studio door. It was Victoria. She looked different, more subdued. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup. The hardness in her eyes was gone, replaced by something I couldn't quite place. Hi, Stephanie, she said, her voice lacking its usual confidence. Thank you for seeing me. I offered her a seat. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, I've been in therapy for the past year. It's been tough, but I've had to face some hard truths about myself, about how I've treated you. She looked me in the eye. I was jealous of you, Stephanie. All these years, I thought I had it all, but you had something I never did. The ability to be yourself without needing everyone's approval. You connected with Grandpa in a way I never could because you were just being you. I was stunned. This was not what I expected her to say. Jealous of me? You had everything. The grades, the career, the perfect life. External validation, she corrected. It wasn't enough. And the more Mom and Dad favored me, the more I needed that favoritism to feel good about myself. It became a prison. Every achievement just made me feel like I had to do more. She continued, I'm not asking for forgiveness. What I did to you was unforgivable. The lawsuit, the lies, trying to ruin your life, there's no excuse. I just needed to tell you the truth face to face. I thought about her words. It was hard to believe that this was the same Victoria who had tried to destroy me. It will take more than words to rebuild trust, I said. I know, she nodded. I don't expect us to be close. I just don't want you to think you did something wrong. The problem was me. As we talked more, I could see that she was sincere. We left the meeting with a cautious hope for the future. In the months that followed, we started to build a new relationship, slowly and carefully. We met for coffee once in a while and sent each other short texts about neutral topics. It's not the close sisterhood we could have had, but it's a start. I used more of Grandpa's inheritance to expand the scholarship fund I'd started in his name. It now includes a mentorship program for young artists. At the first scholarship ceremony, I shared the story of how Grandpa's belief in me had kept me going through the tough times. Sometimes, all it takes is one person to see your true value, I told the recipients. Grandpa was that person for me, and this scholarship is my way of paying it forward. Judge Thompson came to the ceremony. He shook my hand and said, Ms. Harris, your case has stayed with me. It's heartening to see something positive come out of such a difficult situation. His words meant a lot to me, a validation from someone who had witnessed one of the darkest chapters of my life. Ryan and I welcomed our first child, a son named Arthur, after my grandfather. Holding him in my arms, I promised that he'd always know his worth was not based on achievements, but on who he was. My parents, trying to be better grandparents, doted on him without the unfair expectations they'd had for Victoria and me. Victoria sent a thoughtful gift, a set of art books, and kept a respectful distance, understanding that trust would take time to build. Life has turned out in ways I couldn't have imagined during the worst of Victoria's lawsuit. My business is booming, my marriage is stronger, and my relationship with my parents is slowly healing. The inheritance that caused so much conflict has become the foundation for a life based on my own values. On Arthur's first birthday, I took him to visit Grandpa's grave. I placed a bouquet of his favorite flowers on the headstone and said, "He would have adored you, and he'd be so proud of the life we've built." As I sat there, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. It was a painful path, filled with betrayal and heartache, but without those challenges, I might never have found the strength to break free from the roles my family had assigned me. In the end, Victoria's attempt to hurt me had actually set me free. The truth had come out, and healing had begun. Karma, it seems, works in mysterious ways, turning pain into growth and bringing about a kind of justice that we couldn't have planned. Have you ever experienced family betrayal that led to unexpected growth? Share your stories in the comments. Sometimes, the most painful experiences become our greatest teachers, just as they were for me. If this story resonates with you, consider subscribing to hear more about family dynamics, healing, and personal growth. Your support means the world to me, and your stories might help someone else feel less alone in their family struggles. Thank you for joining me on this journey. May we all find the courage to stand in our truth, even when those closest to us try to deny it.